Good afternoon. This is a special meeting of the panel on housing. We'll continue with our third session. We started at 9 a.m. and we have had 2 sessions receiving views from deputations. Now it's the third session. Every deputation can speak for 3 minutes. Deputations are reminded that your speeches and your written submissions are not protected by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Please also note there's a notice on attendance of meetings in the Legislative Council complex and the relevant security measures. The notice has been attached to the letter sent to you, and a copy is also placed in front of your desk. If necessary, please get a copy from our security staff. If you want to listen to the proceedings, please remember that you can tune in to the foreign channel, Channel 0 for language, Channel 1 Cantonese, Channel 2 English, Channel 3 Putonghua. If you have prepared written submissions, please write down your name and give it to our staff before you leave. We'll make copies and for members' reference. We have a tight schedule, so every deputation will speak for 3 minutes, and then I'll invite the administration to give a response before I open the floor for members to raise questions. For this particular meeting, we have from the Transport and Housing Bureau, Ms. Agnes Wong, Deputy Secretary, and also from the Transport and Housing Bureau, we have Mrs. Vicky Kwok, Principal Assistant Secretary. The first speaker is Ms. Lai Yunmei. Yes, I would like to tell you what our views. The administration should introduce tenancy control as soon as possible to protect people's right to secure tenancy, and also to stop the rich people from exploiting poor people and reduce the wealth gap. Housing is a serious problem. This is certainly the last straw. This morning, many deputations and speakers have talked about the difficulties that they have encountered in the rental market. We have a systemic problem with the financial system and the property sector. This has affected our people's livelihood to a great extent. Professor Anthony Jones stated in an article in 2010, before he became a director of bureau, saying that the property sector is now very much part of the government structure. We had hoped that he would do something to break that a cozy relationship between the two. But now it seems that the Bureau is unwilling to introduce tenancy control because the report of the Bureau talks about the downside of tenancy control. But in the U.S. and in many European countries, they have had a lot of experience in imposing tenancy control. Even if they have encountered problems, we have to view them in the context of the political, social, economic context and see how we can adjust. It's said that tenancy control will affect the supply of rental property, and also whether the landlord will just use the property for a different purpose. There are many things that the government can do. For example, vacant property tax, capital gains tax, and so on. We have to make sure that real property is not just for speculation. It's there to meet real housing needs. And we also have a system to protect, to offer security of tenancy. At present, the system is an imbalanced one. The tenant has no bargaining power at all. The government should not just arrange the arguments based on a preconceived conclusion. Actually, the administration should give first priority to protecting the rights, the housing rights of tenants. I would like to ask deputations not to have the placard in front of you blocking your face, the view of your face. And if there's no one sitting in the seats concerned, please remove the placards, because otherwise I wouldn't know whether there's someone there. Thank you. Ms. Zhao Wing-chi, at the last meeting of this panel, the Secretary, Professor Anthony Chang, said that the root cause was the inadequate supply. According to the Housing Authority for 2013, the number of household units exceeded the number of households by 200,000. According to the R&V department, comparing the situation before and after the abolition of tenancy control, the vacancy rates have gone up. For Type A flats, last year there were 12,000 vacant flats. And since 2002, the vacancy rate has been has been above 10%. So one wonders whether the high vacancy rate is due to the abolition of the tenancy control. The shortage of supply is just an illusion. According to the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, as at the end of May this year, unpaid mortgage loans amount to $920 billion. And in May, newly granted loans amounted to $22.7 billion. If 10% of the landlords involved are for the rental market, there will be $100 billion. Even if there is tenancy control, it doesn't mean that the landlords don't have to repay the $100 billion of mortgage loan. But there is a departure from the appropriate core values. They don't think the housing is to meet the housing needs. The Hong Kong Exchange Funds has extended the scope of investment, and now they're involved in property investment and even the property market in London. That's why Londoners have been asking for full-scale tenancy control to be introduced. The government control the buying and selling of land. It has the responsibility to provide adequate and affordable housing to our people and should balance the interests of the landlord and tenant. We should not allow the landlord to change the layout of a flat without regulation and to charge high rent. There should be a new tenancy control system and also rent regulation, as well as capital gains tax and vacant property tax, so that housing will no longer be for speculative purposes, but to meet housing needs. Mr. Wong Kin Lai, we are in favor of the reintroduction of a tenancy control, and also there should be a review of the landlords and tenants ordinance. I think the logic of the government's report is simple. It doesn't want to introduce tenancy control. Well, it just ignores the interests of the grassroots. The report refers to the experience of Cambridge, Massachusetts in the U.S. And there was a drop of 9% of flats available for rent. And also they refer to the revocation of experience of revocating the tenancy control in Boston, resulting in more accommodation for rent. From 1970 to 1980, something happened. It's really about the ratio. Were there more flats, more properties? or because of a wealth effect, more people purchase instead of renting accommodation. Well, because of factors such as affordability and supply were relevant as well. Therefore, the government failed to take into account a basket of factors involved.
The rental market can reflect the overall supply of housing. It is said that in 2008 to 2013 there will be a net increase of 9,000, but it is way below. It is way below the promised figure of over 100,000. It is said that later on in the same 5-year period, the supply would be 17,000 to 18,000. But this is the production figure, not the net production figure, meaning you have not included the clearance or redevelopment numbers. In all districts, people are experiencing a lack of housing that is affordable by grassroots. You always say you want to promote transactions in the market, so you don't want to impose too much control. But you have to think about your role. The objective is not to promote transactions, but rather through market transactions, grassroots can meet their basic needs. But now through these transactions, grassroots cannot get the daily necessities. For the grassroots, people are paying 30 to 40% of their household income for rent. And it means that the market has already failed. We want you to reintroduce rent control. We are not talking about the first, second, third generation of rent control, but a balanced approach. But first of all, you should review the ordinance and also revamp the entire policy. Mr. Kwok Tek Shing. Please start, Mr. Kwok. This is my personal view. We need to find accommodation. That is our right. But we can only accept rent increases by owners. There is no room for negotiation. After we have done away with rent control, we are made to suffer from different problems. I don't know how you can help the citizens in meeting the living expenses. You promised a wait of 3 years for PRH, but many people have waited for 3 years after 3 years, and you are only delaying the supply. I hope you will help us. Very often the URA will put away flats. They would resume old flats and build luxury flats which are without or outside the affordability of grassroots. I hope the URA will be asked to give back land to the government which will build PRH for the grassroots. Thank you. Mr. Chen Chiu Long. We support rent control. Rent is extremely high and the government cannot build enough PRH. So you need to buy time and in the interim help the grassroots. If you have rent control and in the short term rent will rise in the interim, or in the short term, then you should introduce rent subsidy so there will be check and balance. Can give you an example. The government would actually want to consider rent control, but it doesn't want to give subsidy, and now you resort to the community care fund. You know there will be another payment by the end of the year, but these are just one-off payments. If you can go for rent subsidy, and at the same time provide check and balance by rent control, then you can buy time to build PRH. Secondly, the government always says you don't have land in the urban area. But in Tai Kok Tsui, you can see different luxury developments which have all been built by the URA. The URA acts on behalf of the government. In Tai Kok Tsui, in Kwun Tong, the URA resumes a lot of flats. Can't it give some back to the government or HA to build PRH? I don't believe the URA is suffering from a loss. Come to Tai Kok Tsui, you can see that the market has failed. Also, if you build the buildings and then you chase away the people in the old flats, where can they go? They can only go to live on the rooftop, but that is illegal. And then they may go to factory buildings. Again, that is illegal. They queue up for PRH and they have waited 6-7 years and they cannot go to Kai Tech. It seems you want to build PRH which offers only for a small unit. And I hope you will monitor the situation. It seems they are building smaller PRH flats. Mr. Lee fed you, but please lower the placard in front because I cannot see Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee? Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to put forward 3 views on rent control. Number 1, grassroots in To Kwa Wan and other districts face the same problem. They are waiting for PRH, but they don't know when they will be housed. The government cannot deliver the promise of a wait of 3 years. The audit report has said that the supply would be tighter even later. And in 2004, rent control was removed, and with Highland Premium, the government leads in speculation of the market, and people have a very difficult time. You promised there would be a review every 3 years when you removed rent control in 2004, but we have not had even one review after 10 years. Their wages cannot catch up with housing expenditure. They have been subject to very high rent for 10 years. I believe there should be a comprehensive review. Many government officials, including the secretary himself, said that rent control would push up rent and reduce supply. This is how they responded. This is how they refused to reintroduce rent control. However, they have not put forward any evidence to support what they said. I think that kind of response is irresponsible. Some people said that rent control would interfere into the market and Hong Kong's status as the freest economy in the world would be affected. But Hong Kong was regarded as the freest economy when we had rent control. And also, free market or free economy is not the ultimate solution. If there are problems in the community, sometimes we cannot rely on the free market alone. You look at statutory minimum wage. That is your way of one of the ways to deal with the situation. The DAB and government representatives put forward worries about rent control, but they are all technical only. And you can solve these technical problems with technical solutions. The government and the public have different views about rent control. We need, therefore, public consultation to resolve the discrepancies. Secondly, tenancy right. The government should ensure that there is stable and long-term housing for the people to be able to stay in the same accommodation without eviction is a kind of right. SDU people have low wages, but rent continues to go up. The more they move house, the smaller their flat becomes. Thank you. Your time is up. Ms. Noel Choi. Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether you think all the housing policy has to do with figures. 3 years for PRH, 3 years interim review for rent control, but people are moving from tenement building to another tenement building. They are subject to rent increase and sometimes they are evicted unreasonably. This is the aftermath of not having rent control. you have failed in your governance, but then only the grassroots are suffering. I know a resident who has been subject to a $1,000 increase by the owner, and if he cannot afford it, he has to remove or move house by the 1st of August. He is working a few jobs and he has to take care of his child. I have accompanied him to a tenement building, the 7th floor, only by a staircase. It is in a very poor condition. It measures 600 square feet and it fetches a rent of $6,000, and there will be other unreasonable utility charges plus refuse collection charge, and this would take up over half of the wages. Accommodation is one of the basic rights. Why is it that in a free market, housing has become a tool for speculation? Many deputations have told you about these miserable stories, and we have put forward different proposals. Can you just turn a blind eye to all these so the old will die and then grassroots have to move from small flats to SDUs and in the end to the streets? I hope you will not just play a game with figures. Please consult the public on rent control. And also provide a feasible and forward-looking timetable. Whether or not you are going to do it, you have to give accountable explanations to the public instead of just telling us that you have considered the negative side. Next, Mr. Yu Xiu-po. Thank you, Chairman. In another forum, we have heard a social worker say that in Tai Kok Tsui, there was a flat fetching only a rent of $4,000. In Shaguhui and Shangshui, we can also see a flat renting out for $2,000, and it measures 400 square feet. I can see people are moving from the urban area to the NT, and then to Shangshui, and then to Shenzhen in the mainland, and then to second-tier cities. And many people are telling me that Hong Kong is unlivable. What is the government doing? All policies and measures are pushing grassroots out from Hong Kong. We are forcing people to leave. Mrs. Carrie Lam talked about a population policy, but on the other hand, a laissez-faire economy is forcing more people to leave Hong Kong. Is this a responsible government? I have been to Shangshui. For a few years, I have seen residents move to Shenzhen, and then they come back to Hong Kong to work. Chairman, you are right. Transportation or transport subsidies can help because many people now live in Shenzhen across the border. What is happening? Shouldn't Hong Kong workers live in Hong Kong? I'd like to talk about the Catholic diocese. In 1961, Pope John XXII issued this teaching that the government should have more power to remove imbalance in the economy. In simple terms, he says the government should have bigger powers in order to check the imbalances amongst different sectors of the economy. And if the government doesn't do the appropriate thing and not the perfect thing about the economy, then the country will be in chaos, and rich people who know nothing about dignity and shame will exploit the poor. This will spread in society. That is a government that gives a candle to the devil. As the Pope said, you are helping the owners who seek to increase rents all the time. In Shangshui, rent is increased every half a year. You may not know this, so review the ordinance as soon as possible. Next, Ms. Kitty Yan. Starting from 2004, we did not have rent control, and this is the 10th year without rent control. it is good that we have the opportunity to express our views to you today. We'd like to have rent control again. Unfortunately, the Secretary and the Undersecretary are both absent, and we are quite disappointed. How sincere is the administration in listening to us? I think some other grassroots have spoken, and where we are, some Kaifongs have told us in Shangwu Hui you have to pay $3,500 for a 100-square-foot flat. A single parent with 2 sons would beg the owner not to increase rent because the single mother is so worried if she is evicted, where she and her 2 sons can go.
Grassroots people have been saying that even if they work day and night, the wage increase can never catch up with a rental increase, and they have to pay a lot of their wages for rent. Every person in the community has the right to get decent and adequate housing, and the government should protect people's housing rights. But unfortunately, the government would use the excuse of a free market not to do this. Actually, the grassroots people never have any freedom. They exploited. According to a Legislative Council document, introducing tenancy control would prompt the landlord to increase utility charges. Actually, the landlord is doing something illegal by supplying electricity to a third party, and the utility charges are unreasonable. The government should get rid of this phenomenon. Rent increase is far beyond people's affordability. What has the government do? It just sit on its hands and do nothing. So I have a question for Ms. Agnes Wong, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing. According to the latest information announcement of the HA, we are only going to get 9,800 new PRH units, but a 250,000 people are on the waiting list for PRH. So what's the role of the government in resolving housing problems? Is it just turning a blind eye to the difficulties faced by the grassroots? Mr. Zheng Gafai, to every person, every grassrooter, a stable and secure housing environment or accommodation is just a dream. According to the Housing Authority, in the coming year, there will be only 24,800 PRH units for allocation. 70% will be for those on the waiting list. So 17,000 or so will be allocated to those on the waiting list. So many people will have just keep on waiting. In the North District, most of the poor families are families with 3 members. They earned some $16,000, and rent plus utility charges would amount to more than $6,000 or $7,000. And every rental increase would involve paying $1,000 more. They don't know what to do if they are asked to pay higher rent time and again. And they want the government to regulate the property market, the rental property market, and not to allow the landlord to do whatever he wants. They are, who are suffering from chronic diseases or occupational diseases, they dare not go to see a doctor, and the children want to join interest or special classes or interest classes. They dare not allow them to do it because of cost control. There should be regulation of the rental increase. That the right of the tenant should be protected. Don't allow the landlord to do whatever he can. And you should protect the tenant's rights. It's their basic human rights. more should be done to lessen the burden of the grassrooters. We must allow our next generation to live in better accommodation. We are other people's children. We may have our own children. You just imagine the family is never secured, and they never be able to live peacefully. Mr. Zhong Xiangwei, I want to talk about the situation in Shek-Wu-Hui. There are many SDUs. Some 2,000 SDUs can be found in Shek-Wu-Hui. The size is about 60 to 100 square feet, and rent is about $3,000 to $5,000. And we have not included utilities. And these people earn something just above the statutory minimum wage, or $8,000 or $9,000. Rent alone account for half of the income, and they have to maintain and provide for their children. But half or over half of the income goes to rent. In the past, rental increase would be something like $200 to $400. But now it's even higher, $500 or more each time. And according to some the tenants, the additional rent can be as high as $800 to $1,000. While they are waiting for PRH, we should have tenancy control so that people can get affordable housing, and that they don't have to face rental increase without any security. Some SDUs are not used for housing, but for the running tuition centers or warehouses. And as a result, rent becomes even higher. There should be proper regulation of the use of residential properties. These tenants have no choice but to accept the higher rent or move out. So for tenants living in Shek-Wu-Hui, they can only stay in one unit for a year, and they have to move. The tenant would increase rent after the expiry of the fixed tenancy agreement, and since there's no right for tenancy renewal, they may have to move to, say, Sam Shui Po, and their children will have to go to a different school. The government should protect people's right to the housing. We want tenancy control be introduced, and there should be rent regulation. And in the longer term, more PRH units should be constructed. Ms. Lau Hoi Man, I want to tell you the housing problems faced by North District workers. Many of them are waiting for PRH, and they cannot afford to buy, so the only option is for them to rent. As some other speakers said, the more the rent gets higher and higher, and the unit they rent gets smaller and smaller. If for units are closer to the railway station or the town center, they could not afford those. They will have to move to squatter huts or rooftop for SDUs or subdivided units in village houses. And some even have to rent bed spaces because SDU is no longer affordable to them. In the North District, rent has increased so rapidly, and some mothers are very concerned that their children has no room to move, and they can only do everything on the bed, eating, studying, and everything. And for new arrivals, they said they would not like to stay in their homes for one extra second. If they don't have to, they would go back to Samjan after work. And also you have to face the prospect of eviction you will be asked to pay $800 or $1,000 more, and if you say you can't afford it, the landlord would ask you to move out right away, and there's no advance notice. There's no protection for the tenant. Whether we're talking about Sheung Shui, North District, Tai Kok Tsui, or To Kwa Wan, this is the situation faced by many tenants, and actually it happens all over Hong Kong. If there's no rent control, no tenancy control, and these tenants have no bargaining power, what is the government going to do in response? Mr. Wan Siu Kin. Thank you, Chairman. I'm speaking on behalf of the Democratic Party. In 2003, the tenancy control and the security of a tenancy was scrapped, which was introduced in 1982, and things have got out of hand, which is plain for all to see. Rent increase has been a common phenomena. Supply has been tight. People have been asking for the reintroduction of the tenancy control, and the government has been putting up excuses saying that this will reduce supply, and this would actually push up rent. The number of housing units that can provide housing to the needy will not go up very quickly in the near term. So there should be a discussion on the reintroduction of the tenancy control. We want to make 3 points. In 2003, when the previous tenancy control was scrapped, Mr. Michael Soon, the official in charge, promised a review every 3 years, but that was not done. That promise was not kept. The Democratic Party would like the administration to conduct a public consultation exercise on tenancy control as soon as possible, and also to come up with a timetable and make a decision on whether rent control should be reintroduced. And we should consider, through legislation, provide for 3-year tenancy agreements. The tenancy should last for 3 years, and so as to protect both parties. First, we protect the landlord's right to the property, and we also make sure that the rental market is more stable. And the 3-year tenancy period is also to tie in with the promise of the government of giving people PRH units after they have waited for 3 years, to further increase the availability of rental accommodation. The government should allow HOS or TPS owners to lease their properties without paying the premium. These landlords should be allowed to lease their properties, and the rental income should be shared with the government, so that we can avoid or minimize vacancies. Because at present, these owners cannot lease their properties before paying the premium, and some would left the properties vacant, and some would refrain from doing so because of the high premium asked for by the government. Mr. David Chu. Many people have been talking about the difficulties faced by tenants living in SDUs. It seems that everyone is here to air their grievances. I used to work in a bank. I serve corporate clients. Many SMEs bosses would come to deposit money. Some would complain about the difficult business environment. There was a restaurant owner. The size of the restaurant premises is 400 square feet. Well, in the evening, people have to queue up. There were 8 people employed by him. The turnover was $10,000 a month, and so it's $300,000 per month. If you deduct food costs, 30%, $100,000 in wages, the owner would still earn $30,000 to make a living. And after the 2-year tenancy agreement, the rent went up from $60,000 to $100,000. And then the simple calculation will tell you that he will incur a loss of $10,000 a month. So the business went under. Because if he did not renew the tenancy, he would have to move to another premises. Renovation would cost him another $1 million. The profit he gained in the previous 2 years wouldn't be sufficient to pay for the renovation. How could he make a living?
In fact, residential flats are in the same position as shop spaces. Usually the rent increase is 20 to 30%, but wages cannot go up by the same margin, and they are forced to leave. Do you think this is normal? Do you think this is what you want to see? This is Hong Kong today. If you are not sick, if you are healthy, you don't need to see a doctor. But if you are sick, let us not cheat ourselves that everything is normal. I think it's time we have stopped and face up to reality. Hong Kong is sick. Housing is a basic need, but then this is always our biggest headache. People can't get married because of a lack of housing. The government has all the medication in its hands. You can have rent control. You can control the rate of increase. You can have tenancy protection to protect the rights of tenants. You have all these medication. Yet Hong Kong is sick, and Hong Kong people ask you to do a prescription, and yet you don't even look at the patient. You say they all have side effects, and you prefer to see the patient die without prescribing any medication. You are a killer. In 1996, there was a delay in removing rent control because the market was heated. In 2004, it was removed because housing supply was scarce. The situation is the same now. Okay, time is up. Please stop speaking. Ms. Leung Mei Yi, are you there? Because I cannot really see you. Ms. Leung Mei Yi, is she here? No. And then next, Mr. Leung Chi Him. Yes, Chairman. Many people have spoken today. I don't know whether the high-ranking officials have heard us. So let me also say something. Without shame, you are not human. That is what Mencius said. I think the principle of your governance now is delaying matters. I don't think you are attending to the needs of the grassroots. You always say we don't want to intervene into the market. But is there going to be so important for the market? You say people would take back the flats, they don't want to rent out the flats. But then this is not logical. Small owners depend on rental income for their livelihood. So in the long term, they would rent out their flats. And you have to tackle the problem instead of just saying that rent control has its downside. Mr. Zheng, he has a high income, he has an air-conditioned office. Does he have shame? Mencius also said humans start to be human when you have sympathy for others. So would Anthony Zheng understand that you should not give others what you don't want yourselves? A family of a few would live in a flat of 100 square feet. Now Hong Kong only concentrates on economic activities, and these people are not protected. They are living in fear, and rent control is one way out to provide reprieve for these people. Many people know that our Gini coefficient is the highest in the world, but are you facing up to it? You only uphold free economy and you neglect the needs of the residents. This is hard to imagine. I know residents are always fighting for rent control, and their purpose is the same. You have lost the trust of the people because people have been waiting 3 years after 3 years without PRH. You should start to take the first step if you don't take the first step, how can you do more for the people? We want rent control because we think you lack a forward-looking and long-term housing policy. You only look at the very short-term reality. So I hope you will again review the strategy for providing housing and provide short-term solutions, or else there would be deep-seated conflicts. You must have a timetable to do this review. Next, Ms. Chen Hoi-chi. Many people have said that housing is a basic need and it is also a necessity. Many people have said that after rent control was removed, there is hefty increase of rent and determination of tenancy and reduction of bargaining power for tenants. People are moving into the NT and they are moving into smaller flats, and owners are not helping to repair and maintain the flat. Anthony Cheung does not ever appear in public hearings. Well, he was here in the past, but then he did not say anything that smacked of sincerity. The report we said was very biased. A member asked why he only asked questions without providing solutions, and he blamed it on legislators, saying that they did not ask for a solution. If you want to impose rent control, this will not be what you want to say. And he said another thing that impressed us. He said he would watch the changes in the rental market, and we were so angered because he would only watch without doing anything. The Bureau does not have sincerity. 70% of the views on LTHS said that there should be rent control, but then he only adopted a perfunctory attitude towards us. Overseas experience is good for reference. In the Netherlands, there is a capping of rent. In Sweden, rent should not exceed 25% of people's income. In Canada, there is no capping of rent, but there are other incentive measures for owners to do repair and maintenance, and also they provide tax breaks. So the experience is good for reference, and we can pick and choose from the successful examples. The Bureau and the government have neglected the advantages of rent control. As was said, PRH waiting list will become short because not everybody would choose PRH if they can live in the private market, and there would be more time to take care of the household. Some parents have children, but they work 2 or 3 jobs. There are so many residents here, but then there are more who have to go to work and cannot come. And we are talking about the environment fit for human accommodation. Children should not be doing their homework on the bed. We can talk about the form of rent control, the technical side of rent control together, but why don't we have it? We should have a review. There should be public consultation and a timetable. Ms. Cheung, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to reiterate certain points. Why, even if we live in SDU, we have to move to remote areas and into smaller SDUs. No one would choose to live in an SDU if they have the choice, but our income just cannot afford us to live in other accommodation. We are just like rooftop dwellers, and we are faced with really serious problems. We mentioned overseas examples, and I would say that those might not be realistic examples because we have different political framework and also different areas and also population demographics. Why is it that the land policy cannot reflect our needs, and why is it that the government cannot drop a bottom line for us when we rent accommodation, when we face developers? Why do you allow owners to increase rent and force us to leave? Why do you protect those who have better living conditions? We are just talking about protecting the rights of the grassroots. We are very modest in our request. We just want a limit to how much rent can go up by. We are not even talking about maintenance and repair. We are just talking about things that are very basic. If the government can consult the public, you should provide a timetable. Look at NENT. There have been many consultations and meetings were held here, but in the end you ride roughshod over the people. There was parliamentary violence. I think this government is a mess. SDU means there is a big wealth gap in society. Why can't the government do something for us? In the end, we are just saying that people don't make such a big profit. It doesn't mean they are going to suffer a loss. I think this government is incompetent. I hope there will be consultations soon so you can listen to the residents. So you can implement useful policies. Mr. Kwok Ka-ping, thank you. It is the government's responsibility to do something about problems and provide solutions, and looking for happiness is the responsibility of the individuals. I'd like to give you an example. In To Kwa Wan, someone lives in a flat of 400 square feet, but it's divided up into 7 cubicles, and there is only one bed, and he lives in a bed space that rents for $1,500 and with a deposit of $350, and he only has one small window in his bed space. He cannot stay there in the summer. He has to stand in the corridor. When you face such a situation, apart from the CCF, you have nothing to help them with. You say Hong Kong, our home. But if Hong Kong is really your home, do you want this to happen in your home? I don't think so. I have heard from the DS, Ms. Wong, that we need to develop other industries as well. I know that apart from the property market, we can develop other industries. Just now the Labour Party, Mr. Chiu, said that apart from commercial building rental, residential rental is also very high. I like to say that many grassroots families and SDU families are living in environments which are not conducive to the growth of their children. In fact, we need to provide a safe and comfortable environment for our younger generation. 10 years ago, you wanted to prop up the market, so you removed rent control. Now the market is quite heated, and yet you are dawdling. Look, in your report you said rent control has many negative aspects. But if that's the case, you should show the resolve to resolve them. Just like XRL and NENT, you force them through. And why don't you do the same for rent control? I think you're dragging your feet. Thank you. Next, Ms. Pauline Jessica Hilary Chan. On the one hand, you refuse to build PRH. On the other hand, you do not impose rent control. You just turn a blind eye to the plight of grassroots. You are pushing them over the cliff. There is a queue of 240,000 in the waiting list for PRH, but you have been ducking the issue. You make use of the QPS figures as an excuse, and you don't build more PRH to respond to our needs. For young people, Like us, we don't know when we can have PRH. We are subject to the QPS, and we may have to wait for over 10 years. And in the design of flat allocation, you target applicants who have tertiary education or above. It seems you are going to impose a demerit point system and also a review or checking system. You want to chase young people out of the waiting list. You are assuming that young people with tertiary institutions or education would have the ability to support themselves. And in fact, you are taking away their right for accommodation. You want to push us into the private rental market. But then that is an unregulated market, and so we have no protection.
The landlord can increase rent any time. The rate of increase is unregulated. So you can imagine that after a young person has graduated, you have to repay loans, and after deducting all the expenses, how can we afford the high rent? Over the years, the administration allowed properties to hoard the properties for speculative purposes. And you also allow the URA to resume old properties, and the site would not be used for PRH. And the government is not building sufficient PRH units, and the grassrooters are forced to pay high rent in the private market. The administration has been acting against the interests of the grassroots. It's time the government amended its way, and we should not allow the government to drag its feet. No more consultation. Immediate action is required, because these people are already in a dire situation. Well, we should protect the housing rights of all, and as, in particular, the young people's right. Ms. Ju Moon Chan. Some say that if we introduce a tenancy control, there may be rogue tenants. Well, we have a transparent system. We can upload information on rogue tenants. Now, who are the rogue persons, the landlords, and the speculators? It's time the government should review the tenancy control. According to some officials, tenancy control will increase the rent because the landlord will push up the rent at the initial stage, or there will be more vacant flats. Well, you are actually confusing the cost and the risk and the consequence. There should be empty vacant property tax, or speculative tax, or capital gains tax, so to make sure that we make the best use of our available resources. It's been said that we have many vacant units, equivalent to the number of households. So many properties have been hoarded up for speculation. The government should not encourage hoarding and speculation in commodities that are needed as essential facilities. And people should not pay very high prices and speculate in properties. Otherwise, they have to face the risk. There were people who had to sleep on the street. If there were no PRH units, there would be no prospect of people saving up sufficient money to buy their own homes. So the solution lies in building fewer luxuries, apartments, and more PRH. And HOS flats should be sold at cost, and the owners can only live in the HOS flat or sell them back to the HA. These should not be allowed for speculation. Property speculators and property developers have been speculating in something essential for people's housing. And many people have been lured into this big bubble of speculation. The participants would, of course, are opposed to any policy that may lead to the bursting of the bubble. Your time is up. The government has been putting up excuses. Mr. Rita Jiang, we have been talking about tenancy control for many years, but we have never done it over these years. If we don't have any factories, and then we have no SDUs, would everyone have to sleep on the street? The government should take care of these people's housing needs. Well, the North Vicente project is considered a priority, and the government would like to push through the proposal urgently. But what about housing needs of the grassroots? I would just say that the government would just ignore us. If we ask for something, they will say a whoopie's way for 3 years, plus 3 years, plus 3 years. Maybe before we die, or we'll get what we want, what we need, the day we die. Well, tenancy control protects the interests of both the landlord and the tenant. Why can't we go for legislation now? Why is the government saying that we have to allow the market to do whatever these people want? There's a queue of 240,000 people for PRH. How much longer? How long would they have to wait? If the government insists on saying that there's no problem or there's no tenancy control, I think this would become a bomb. Mr. E.K. Good afternoon. I'm from Neighborhood and Workers Service Center. My center would like to reintroduce tenancy control. There should be security of tenancy. We should prevent rent increase, unlimited. The landlord can ask for as big a rental increase as possible, and there's no negotiation. You can take it or leave it. From the residents that we have contacted are waiting for PRH. I just took a call. He was evicted. He had a briefcase with him walking on the street and doesn't know where to go to find accommodation. Well, this is happening day in and day out. And what is the administration doing? Well, we have a public hearing. They will tell you that your views have been noted and they will consider your views. But the tenants cannot wait. Are you suggesting that they should sleep on the street with their children? Many people have to go to a psychiatric outpatient clinic because of the huge pressure. There's no way they can put up a struggle against rental increase. And the government would allow the housing rights of the grassroots be deprived in the name of a free market. So please don't tell us that if we do this, we are going to affect economic development. The landlord will not die just because the rent is a little bit lower than what he has asked. But for the tenants, the pressure might be too much, and they may be driven to suicide. How can you compensate their family members if this happens? I don't want any more fake consultation by the administration. I want the administration to introduce tenancy control right away. Public opinion is very clear, and there should be no more procrastination. It's an urgent matter. Please introduce tenancy control now. Mr. Au Lapang, I'm from Left 21. 100 or so of speakers have talked about the evil of cancelling the tenancy control. There are many mistakes and sins. First, many people have been rendered homeless. And second, many small shop operators have their businesses closed. Many people's jobs have been lost. And even small shops can afford the high rent. They have to increase the prices of their goods, and adding to the burden of ordinary people. So we can fill a whole website with such sins. The government has a high land premium policy. That's why the administration has been reluctant to control rent, because you want to lure people into buying properties with the prospect of high rent. And with high rent, you would push up property prices, and the property developers can reap huge profits. This is the original sin. But it's not something unexpected by the government. It's actually expected, and that makes the problem even more serious. The important thing about tenancy control is that it has some social utility. Prices are high, wages are low, Hong Kong workers are subject to heavy exploitation, whether we're talking about the tenant or the small business operator renting premises. If a family can reduce the rent by half, then there can be more resources to support their children, their elderly, to improve their health, or to improve their living conditions. Yet a small businessman have to pay half of the revenue for rent. If rent is lower, the business operator can improve the benefits for their employees. So lower rent can have a lot of social benefits. And high rent will also affect our cityscape. In a community where the landlord dictates everything, it's no longer a democratic society. So Lab 21 would like to see the reintroduction of tenancy control. We should build more PRA units. There should be empty property tax and capital gains tax. We should rectify the mistake of allowing people to hoard and speculate in properties. Therefore, we can, if we do this, we can restore people's life to a reasonable level. This is not a question of scarcity of land, but rather the inequality in or the unfairness in and resource distribution. The government can take back vacant properties and give them to needy people. Housing is a basic right. The government should not allow people to hoard and speculate in properties. You can resume the properties and allow poor people to live. And in comparison, tenancy control is less severe a structure, a less severe system. Well, we did it before, and we can therefore prevent rental increase. Well, I used to live with a friend in Sam Shui Po. The rent was $6,900. It was increased to $7,800. And then to 9,000. I like to live in Sam Shui Po because you can buy everything you need by going downstairs. And I was on very good terms with shops in the vicinity. But because of the rental increase, I was forced to move out. If the government keeps on destroying people's homes, not just in Northeast NT, whether you live in a private building or you are considered well-off tenants, you will be evicted. The administration cares about the vested interest and not the general public. So what's the purpose of your governance? You are here to help just the businessman and the property developer. On the 1st of July, I stayed behind at Chater Road. Well, I did it because you are forcing us to sleep on the street. And that's not a question about the CE election. The important thing is that we must get back the political power we are entitled to before we can solve the problems. The Occupy Central campaign is the result of people's grievances. We want to get a real ballot power in 27. We want to see the reintroduction of tenancy control.
Mr. Lai Chi-po, I'm from the concerned group of forced eviction. Some people are called to be living in under-occupied flats, and we are evicted. Many people have talked about rent control. They target the private rental market. But to PRH tenants, rent control is also important because there is a relationship between rent control for the private and public market. People are waiting for PRH because they cannot afford private housing. You wait for public housing, but production is slow, and therefore the waiting time is long, and as a result people have to rent in the private market, but they face a private market without rent control. Today, only 2 deputy secretaries are here. I cannot imagine how come there are 109 groups coming and there are so many submissions. In addition to that, why Dr. Anthony Cheung is not here. I really can't imagine this. When we are having this public hearing, we don't know how many people are suffering from high rent in our society. As was very well put, these are rogue owners, not rogue tenants. So let me just reiterate, all the deputations are already very clear with their demands. One, we should review the landlord and tenant consolidation ordinance as soon as possible. There should be public consultation as to how we can have rent control and to tackle rogue owners. And we must have an implementation timetable. Maybe the DS has heard us for a long time, and she has been tingling with her earrings. Now, I don't know whether she is benumbed by the long hearing, but let me just state it clearly for you again. This is our aspiration. Remove rent control. Remove rent control. Consultation, and let us have a review. The meeting is adjourned for 5 minutes. Meeting is adjourned for 5 minutes.